They say the woods are alive, that every snapped twig, every gust of wind through the branches, every rustle of leaves carries a secret. Some say the forest remembers, that it keeps track of those who wander too far, those who peek where they shouldn't. Tonight we're stepping into those shadows together, into the places most people avoid, into the corners of the woods that hide things you're not meant to see. These aren't stories told to entertain you. They are accounts of real, disturbing things found in the woods. Abandoned campsites where footprints vanish, objects left behind as if waiting for someone, whispers in the dark that chill your very bones. And once you hear them, once you know what may be lurking just beyond the tree line, you'll never walk the forest the same way again. Some of what you will hear is impossible to explain. Some of it will make you question what you thought you knew about the world. But one thing is certain: the woods hold their secrets, and sometimes those secrets are eager to find you. This is Farcical Fears, and if you dare to keep searching for the truth hiding in the darkness, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the forest isn't finished with us yet, and the next story may be closer than you think. Let's move to our first story. I never thought I would be telling this story. I always believed the woods were just woods, quiet, empty, harmless. That's what everyone tells you when you grow up on the edge of the forest. But some things you stumble upon can change how you see the world, how you breathe, how you sleep. I learned this the hard way, one autumn weekend, when I decided to go camping alone. It wasn't a long hike, just a few miles into a forest I had wandered as a teenager. The trees there were old, ancient in a way that made you feel small, like you were trespassing on a memory that didn't belong to you. I'd packed lightly, a tent, a sleeping bag, some food, and a flashlight. Nothing fancy, just a weekend escape. From the city I arrived in the late afternoon. The air was crisp, with a smell of wet leaves and soil. Sunlight slanted through the branches in golden streaks, and everything looked normal, peaceful, even. But normal is a dangerous word. In a forest like this, I've come to realize. I found a clearing and set up my tent. The ground was soft, covered in fallen leaves, and I even noticed a small, worn fire pit someone must have used before me. That night, after a simple dinner of canned soup, I sat by the dying fire and listened. At first, it was the usual sounds: the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird settling for the night, the wind brushing against the trees. But as darkness fell, I noticed a different rhythm in the forest. There was something deliberate, almost calculated, a faint step that didn't quite match the natural noises. I paused, holding my breath, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or some small animal. Hours passed. I crawled into my sleeping bag, flashlight at my side, trying to ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, I heard it: soft, slow breathing from outside the tent. Not the quick huff of an animal, not the sound of wind shifting the leaves. It was deliberate, like someone was standing just beyond the fabric, watching. My first instinct was to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. I didn't know what I would say anyway. Who would come out here in the middle of nowhere? Who would be waiting in the dark? The breathing stopped. I thought I had imagined it. I even tried to laugh at myself, forcing my eyes shut. But then, a twig snapped right near the tent. Not far enough away to be a random animal, not faint enough to be the wind. I froze, listening. And then I noticed something that will haunt me forever. The fire, which I had left smoldering, flickered violently, like something had walked around it. My heart pounded so hard I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. I wanted to flee, to grab my pack and run down the trail, but my body refused to move. I don't remember when I finally fell asleep. My dreams that night were filled with whispers I couldn't understand, shadows moving along the edges of my vision, always just beyond reach. When I woke, dawn had broken, pale and gray through the trees. I told myself it had been a nightmare. Maybe I had imagined the sounds. Maybe the forest was just alive, in a way that unnerved city folk like me. But then I saw it. Footprints. Not animal prints. Not the kind of random indentations you see when walking through fallen leaves. These were humanoid, something close enough to human to make my stomach turn. They circled my tent, perfect circles. Not a single trail leading in or out. Just a ring around my tent, as if something had been pacing me all night. I took a photo, my hands shaking, convinced someone would explain it away when I showed them. I packed up as fast as I could, heart still racing, and left without looking back. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought leaving the forest would be enough. But when I returned home and checked my photos, the image of the footprints made my blood run cold. In the center of the ring, just faintly visible in the photograph, was a small indentation I hadn't noticed before. A tiny handprint, pressed deep into the soil. Too small to be mine, too precise to be a coincidence. I showed it to a friend. Who's a tracker, someone who can usually identify prints with ease. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I've never seen anything like this." Whatever it was, it didn't just walk, it observed. After that, I tried to avoid the forest entirely. But something about it stayed with me, a sense that I had been marked. I started hearing noises near my apartment, at night, footsteps in the hallway, the faint crunch of leaves on pavement. Rationally, I knew it couldn't be connected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still there. Just outside the circle I thought I had escaped. Weeks later, I returned to the site. I told myself I was being brave, confronting my fears. But when I reached the clearing, it was gone. Not abandoned, not destroyed, just erased. No fire pit, no signs of a campsite, not even the faint trace of the footprints I had photographed. It was like the forest had swallowed it entirely. My photograph remained the only evidence, but when I showed it to others, they insisted it was a trick of the light or an optical illusion. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't. Something had been there. Something had watched me months. Past life went on as normal as it could. I told fewer people about the incident, afraid of ridicule. Yet at night, I still dream about the circle of footprints, about the careful pacing just beyond my tent. Sometimes I swear I hear breathing when I'm alone. It's not every night, but it's enough. Enough to remind me that the woods remember. Enough to remind me that some encounters don't end when you leave the forest. They follow you. They linger. I never learned what it was that circled my tent that night. And maybe I never will. All I know is that when I hear someone say the woods are harmless, I feel a chill in my chest. Because I know what the silence really holds. And I know that even when the trees are empty, someone or something is still watching. That's the story of the first disturbing thing I ever found in the woods. And the one that changed the way I see every forest from that day forward. Let's move to our second story. It started as a simple curiosity, an old camera I found at a yard sale, labeled only with a faded note that read, "Do not watch." I laughed when I saw it, thinking it was some quirky joke, but something about the note made me hesitate. I've always been drawn to abandoned places, to things people leave behind, and this camera seemed like the perfect artifact for my next urban exploration project. I didn't know then that it held a story darker than anything I'd ever encountered. The camera was a handheld model, dusty, with a cracked lens and the faint smell of mildew. When I turned it on, the battery surprisingly worked, and I could see the last few recordings stored inside. Most were mundane, people walking through parks, old friends playing in empty fields, nothing unusual. But then, as I scrolled down, I found a video dated 10 years ago. The file name was indecipherable, a string of letters and numbers that didn't mean anything to me. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button, a knot forming in my stomach, but curiosity won. The video opened with a group of teenagers laughing, their voices echoing in the empty woods. The footage was shaky, handheld, the kind of video anyone might take during a camping trip. At first, it was normal, almost charming in its amateur feel. They were joking about ghost stories, tossing sticks at each other, daring each other to go deeper into the forest. But then, about 5 minutes in, the laughter stopped abruptly. The camera jerked as one of the teens cried out, a harsh, terrified scream that made me pause the video and hold my breath. On screen, the trees were moving, or something among the trees was moving. At first I thought it was one of the teens playing a prank, but the movement didn't match human motion. There were shadows, elongated and unnatural, slipping between the trunks, following the teens without sound. One of the girls pointed, whispering something I couldn't make out, and the camera spun wildly as the group scattered. Their panicked breathing and shouts filled the audio track. The footage ended abruptly, cut to black. I rewound it several times, trying to convince myself it was just camera distortion or a trick of the light. But no matter how many times I watched, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the footage was watching me back, unable to leave it alone. I started analyzing every frame. There were small details I hadn't noticed at first. A shadow that seemed to appear behind one teen before they even moved. A subtle twitch in the leaves that didn't match the wind. The faintest outline of a figure crouched on a distant hill, half hidden by the trees. It wasn't human, not entirely, yet its posture was deliberate, as if it were studying them, waiting for the right moment to strike. My heart raced every time I saw it, and I knew, somewhere deep down, that the camera had captured something I wasn't supposed to see. I wanted to delete the footage, throw the camera away, forget the whole thing. But then I found more files. Each video was from the same forest, different days, different groups of people. Each one followed a similar pattern. Laughter, casual, wandering, then someone, or something appearing in the distance, subtle at first, then more overt. One video showed a teen's hand reaching out for a friend, then jerking back, eyes wide, as if they had sensed something just beyond their sight. Another had audio distortion that made it sound like whispers, low and indecipherable, echoing around the microphone. Though no one was speaking, I became obsessed. I started documenting everything, keeping a journal of the patterns I noticed. The entity or whatever it was never approached directly on camera, but it was always there. Watching, following, learning. I began to feel the same tension the teens had felt. Even in my apartment, alone, I sometimes caught glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. Shadows that didn't match the light. Faint sounds that didn't belong. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that the videos were affecting my mind. But the rational part of me knew the footage had captured something real. Something dangerous then. One night, I made a critical mistake. I decided to recreate the scene in the footage, walking the same trail the teens had taken 10 years ago. My reasoning was simple. If the camera had captured something, maybe I could see it in real life. Maybe I could understand it. I brought the camera with me, fully charged, intending to record everything for documentation. The forest was silent, almost too silent, as I made my way along the path. Leaves crunched underfoot. My breaths came in short gasps. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, but I kept moving forward. At first, nothing happened. The trail was empty, the trees swaying gently in the night wind. I told myself. The fear was imaginary, that it was just the weight of the videos on my mind. But then I saw it. A flash of movement, a figure crouched behind a tree, watching. I froze, my pulse hammered in my ears. When I blinked, it was gone, but the feeling remained. Something was following me, not just in the shadows, but in the air around me. Every step I took, I felt a presence matching my pace, mimicking my motions. The camera I carried seemed to capture more than my eyes could see. In the small LCD screen, I glimpsed shapes that weren't visible to me directly. Elongated figures, lurking between the trunks, eyes reflecting faintly in the dark. The silhouettes of creatures crouched unnaturally low to the ground. It was like the camera was a bridge, showing me another layer of the forest, one that existed alongside ours, but remained hidden unless recorded. I wanted to run, but the trail behind me had disappeared. The path I had walked was swallowed by darkness, replaced with a dense, impassable wall of trees. Panic set in. I swung the camera wildly, trying to capture what was happening, and in that moment, I saw them clearly. Two figures, humanoid but grotesque, half human, half shadow, crouched low. Their faces were featureless, just dark voids, yet I could feel them studying me. I screamed, dropped the camera, and ran blindly. Branches clawed at my arms, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I stumbled out of the forest onto a dirt road, breathless and covered in cuts, my heart racing. The camera lay on the ground behind me, still recording. When I retrieved it later, I watched the footage in horror. The figures hadn't moved toward me during my escape, they had only followed, perfectly matching my every motion, circling, waiting. Then, Near the end of the recording, the camera jerked violently, capturing something close, something enormous, before the video cut abruptly. I've never been able to process what I saw. The entity or entities never attacked directly, never touched me. But their presence was undeniable, intelligent, patient, watching dots since that night. I've tried to warn others, to destroy the camera, to forget the whole thing, but I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the dark voids of those figures' faces. Every time I hear a rustle in the wind, I imagine them moving just beyond my vision. And I know one thing, they are still out there, waiting for the next person to wander too far. The forest doesn't just hide its secrets, it preserves them, captures them, and sometimes it shares them with anyone foolish enough to look too closely. I still have the camera. I still watch the footage, knowing I shouldn't, and I still hear faint whispers, like voices pressed into the edges of the recordings, telling me that I will never truly leave the forest behind. Whatever was recorded 10 years ago, whatever I chased that night, it is still out there. Patient, observing, and I am nothing but another viewer of its silent, eternal hunt. Let's move to our third story. I remember the first time I saw the scarf. I was a child, no older than 8, playing in the forest behind my grandmother's house. The trees there were thick, their trunks twisted and ancient, and the undergrowth tangled like a living maze. I had wandered farther than usual, chasing a rabbit through the fallen leaves, when I saw it bright red against the brown and gold of autumn. It was tied to a low branch, fluttering lightly in the wind. At first, I thought it belonged to someone, a lost item maybe, but as I stepped closer, I realized it had no owner. No path led to it, no footprints surrounded it. And yet, it felt deliberate, as if someone had placed it there just for me. I reached out, hesitated, and finally touched it. The fabric was warm, almost pulsing beneath my fingers, and a shiver ran up my spine. I didn't understand why it affected me so, why my stomach twisted with fear and fascination all at once. I tugged at it lightly, imagining taking it home, but something made me stop. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. I left it there and ran home, but that night, in my dreams, the scarf appeared again. Floating in the air, tied to a branch that swayed though there was no wind, its edges flickering like fire. I woke screaming, drenched in sweat, the vision burned into my mind. Over the years, the scarf became a recurring presence. Every so often when I returned to the forest, it would be there. Always the same branch, always the same fluttering red against the dull browns of the trees. I told myself it was a coincidence, my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Once, when I tried to take it home, I brought it inside my room. I placed it carefully on my bed, thinking perhaps it was just a curious object, a memento from childhood. That night, I awoke to the sensation of someone breathing close to me. My room was empty, but the scarf had moved. Its edges twitched as though alive, curling toward me. I screamed, threw it to the floor, and it seemed to vanish, only to reappear. Outside my window, draped over the sill, wet with dew, though the night had been dry, as I grew older. The scarf became more than a curiosity, it became a warning. My dreams were plagued by figures I couldn't see clearly. Shadows with elongated limbs, whispering in languages I didn't understand. The scarf always appeared in these dreams, tied to branches that bent impossibly, flanked by these silent watchers. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. I stopped wandering near the forest. But no matter how far I went, no matter how many years passed, the scarf always found a way back into my life. One summer, I returned to the forest with a friend, determined to understand it, to confront whatever it was that had haunted me for so long. I expected to find a branch, a place in the trees where I had left the scarf, and perhaps retrieve it once and for all. Instead, the forest was different, thicker, older. The path I had walked countless times was gone, swallowed by roots and fallen leaves. And there it was, the scarf, suspended not from a branch, but from a slender rope of vine, hanging in the center of a small clearing I had never seen before. It moved gently, as if swaying in a windless void, and the ground beneath it was blackened, scorched in a perfect circle. I felt an urge to approach, a pull I couldn't resist. As I stepped closer, I noticed small details I had never seen, as a child, faint scratches along the trunk of the trees, like talons had carved them. Tiny footprints, smaller than a child's, circling the clearing repeatedly. And at the base of the scarf, the leaves were pressed down in concentric rings, almost like someone or something had been pacing, waiting. My friend urged me to leave, but my fascination overcame fear. I reached out, intending to untie it. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, the forest changed. The air grew thick, almost viscous. The sunlight dimmed to a sickly gray, and whispers began to fill my ears, soft at first, then urgent, insistent. They spoke of rules, of trespassing, of debts unpaid. I tried to pull away, but my hands were frozen to the scarf. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, and I felt an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. My vision blurred, and in the haze, I saw them figures crouched at the edges of the clearing, humanoid but twisted, their limbs elongated and faces featureless. They were circling, pacing the scarf, their attention fixed entirely on me. Panic surged. I tore my hands free, stumbled backward, and the moment I did, the figures vanished. The scarf fell to the ground with a soft thud, and the forest returned to normal light and sound, but the air remained heavy, charged with a lingering malevolence. I didn't take the scarf. I couldn't. Even touching it had left a mark, an indelible memory of the forest's vigilance. I left that day and never returned, but the dreams intensified. In them, the scarf moves closer each night, floating just out of reach, tied to invisible branches in impossible clearings, flanked by silent watchers whose presence presses against my chest even as I sleep. I wake in the dark, gasping, the edges of the scarf still visible in the corner of my eye, red and impossibly bright against the shadows of my room. As an adult, I've tried to rationalize it. I've shown the scarf to experts in folklore and psychology. Some say it is a case of obsessive memory, a childhood object imprinted so deeply it manifests in my dreams. Others insist it is a cursed object, imbued with energy from some unknown ritual, a trap that binds those who encounter it. I've tried burning it, burying it, even leaving it in the forest, but each time it finds a way back. Its presence is subtle yet undeniable, folded into my reality in ways that defy explanation. I've come to understand that the scarf is not just an object, it is a sentinel. It marks me. It waits for me. It reminds me that the forest, even when I am far from it, is never truly empty. That some things are not meant to be disturbed. That some mysteries cannot be solved. And so I live with it, this bright, fluttering thread of red that haunts my life. A constant reminder that curiosity can be dangerous, and that the forest never forgets those who trespass even as children. Even now, as I recount this story, I feel it. The scarf's presence is subtle in the room, just beyond the corner of my vision. A pulse of heat against the floorboards, a faint rustle in the air, a shadow stretching where there should be none, and I know, as I always have known, that no matter what I do, it is waiting. Waiting for the next step, the next misstep, the next curious soul to wander too far into the trees. And I am left with the certainty that some encounters are not temporary. Some curses are not broken, and some things found in the woods will follow you forever. Let's move to our fourth story. It began with an interview. I wasn't looking for anything unusual that day. Just another story for the small local news outlet I worked for. But what I found in that forest would haunt me far longer than any headline ever could. The old man lived on the edge of town, a weathered figure with hands scarred from decades of hard labor, and a gaze that seemed to pierce through time itself. People in town spoke of him quietly, sometimes shaking their heads, sometimes with a nervous laugh, calling him the Watcher of the Woods. No one knew why, exactly, or what he had seen, but everyone seemed to know to respect his warnings. When I arrived at his small cabin, he was already expecting me, his eyes narrowing as he studied my recorder and notebook. "You want to hear about the howls?" he said simply. I nodded, trying to maintain a professional tone. "They're not animals. They never were. And if you hear them, you don't respond, you don't look. You just leave." I scribbled notes, thinking of wolf packs or some local phenomenon. But the way he said it, the almost palpable fear in his voice, made me pause. This was more than a legend. This was personal. He told me the story slowly, beginning decades ago, when he was a young man patrolling the outskirts of the forest as part of a small ranger crew. At first, it was ordinary work tracking deer, marking trails, checking for trespassers. But then they started hearing the howls. Not once, not twice, but night after night, echoing through the trees, impossible to pinpoint. At first, they assumed coyotes, then wolves. But the sound was wrong, too articulate, too deliberate, as though someone or something was calling by name, learning to mimic human tones. The first incident happened to a ranger named Tom. He had been on night patrol, alone, when the howling began. The rangers were trained to ignore it, to keep walking. But Tom had a habit of answering, of responding to strange sounds in the forest. That night, his radio went silent. By morning they found his tracks leading to a clearing, but no tracks leading out, just the marks of someone standing in place for hours, unmoving, and a faint residue on the soil. Dark and wet, that no one could explain. Tom was never seen again. The old man spoke in a low, measured tone, recounting stories of others who had vanished similarly. Hunters, hikers, even a pair of lost teens who wandered in while searching for mushrooms. Each disappearance followed the same pattern, the sound of the howls, a response, and then nothing. The forest seemed to swallow them whole. He emphasized that it was not just the sound that was dangerous, it was curiosity. The forest was alive in a way most people never understood, and the howls were its lure. He handed me a small faded audio tape, the kind with a reel inside. "This was recorded long ago," he said, "and some of what you hear, it will get into your head." I slid it into my recorder when I returned to the office, hesitating for a moment before pressing play. At first I heard nothing but wind and leaves rustling. Then it started the low, melodic sound that gradually morphed into human-like tones. Words I couldn't understand at first, then phrases, almost whispering my own name. My stomach churned, and I had to stop the recording. Even though it was playing in a safe office, I could feel the pull, the unnatural attention of the sound. I went back to the forest several times, trying to make sense of the legend. Each time, I would walk slowly along the trails, careful to remain silent, careful not to respond to the noises that seemed faintly present, even when I convinced myself they were imagining. But the forest always changed around me. Trees seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking. The wind carried voices that weren't there before, and shadows moved just beyond the edges of perception. It was as if the forest remembered every story, every fear, and it was cataloging mine. One evening, I returned to the same clearing the old man had described. I set up my recorder, curious to capture anything unusual. Hours passed, nothing. Then, without warning, the sound began a low, rhythmic howl that slowly rose into words, articulating my own name. The hairs on my neck stood straight. My pulse quickened. I wanted to run, to leave, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The voices seemed to circle me, shifting, layering on top of one another. I realized I was hearing fragments of conversations I had had, names of friends, small secrets whispered in passing. The forest wasn't just making sound, it was learning me. I fled. I ran without looking back, my recorder bouncing in my hand. When I reached the edge of the forest, I dared a glance behind me. The trees swayed as if nothing had happened. Yet, even in the safety of open fields, the low hum of the howls lingered in my ears, faint but insistent. I realized then that the forest didn't care whether you survived, only cared that it knew you, that you acknowledged it. And once you did, part of you belonged to it forever. I tried to warn others. I wrote articles, tried to share the tape and the story. Some dismissed it as folklore, some called it an overactive imagination. But I knew the truth, and I could feel it in the quiet moments. The forest outside my window, the wind that sounded like voices when I walked alone, the subtle pressure that pressed against my mind whenever I thought about the woods, the howls, were patient, waiting for the next person to answer them. The old man is gone now, vanished into the forest years ago. Some say he became one of the watchers, Or perhaps the forest finally claimed him for failing to heed its rules. I don't go near the clearing anymore. I don't walk the forest trails after dark. But the memory remains etched into my mind with a clarity that frightens me. Whenever the wind shifts and carries a faint sound through the trees, I catch myself holding my breath, listening. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear Ita low. Deliberate howl, calling me by name, reminding me that some legends are true, and some forests are never empty. Even now, I keep the old tape in a drawer, wrapped carefully, afraid to play. Yet, I can feel the pull every time I pass it. The forest waits, patient and eternal, for anyone who dares to listen. And I know that someday, I may not be able to resist. The woods will call again, and the howls will never stop until they have their answer. Let's move to our fifth story. I was never supposed to find it. Not the first time anyway. I had been wandering through a forest just beyond the edge of town, the kind of place locals whispered about but never actually entered. Everyone claimed it was harmless, just overgrown and quiet, yet the air carried a strange weight, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I was taking photographs for an art project, trees, moss, the patterns of sunlight filtering through the canopy, completely unaware that something in those woods had been waiting. It started with a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. The ground was uneven, littered with rotting leaves, and the trees surrounding it were unnaturally close together, forming a natural barrier. I remember stepping into the clearing and feeling the air shift, a subtle chill brushing across my skin despite the warm afternoon. That's when I saw the object, a small wooden box, half buried under leaves and moss, its surface slick with dampness. It was unremarkable at first glance, roughly the size of a shoebox, with no markings, no indication of its purpose. Yet something compelled me to reach down, fingers brushing the worn edges. The instant I touched it, a wave of unease washed over me, the kind that makes your stomach twist and your pulse quicken. I hesitated, almost instinctively pulling my hand back, but curiosity won. I lifted the box from the ground and brushed the leaves off. It was heavier than it looked, solid, with a faint metallic odor clinging to its surface. I set it on a fallen log, knuckles white as I inspected it. There was a simple latch, corroded but functional. I lifted it, and inside lay a collection of objects, small personal items, each carefully wrapped in cloth, buttons, a small broken doll's arm, a child's hair ribbon, a tarnished coin. Things that made my skin crawl. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe some sort of twisted art installation left by another wandering soul. But then I noticed the arrangement. Each item was placed with care, as though the box itself had a mind. A coin balanced perfectly on the edge of a button, a doll's arm resting exactly parallel to a hair ribbon. It was meticulous, obsessive, almost ritualistic. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about the care with which the items were arranged told me this wasn't random. Someone or something was communicating, leaving messages I wasn't supposed to understand. I took the box home, rationalizing that I would study it, in the safety of my apartment, that I could unpack its secrets, and perhaps find some logical explanation. But that night, as I lay in bed, I began to notice changes. Small things at first. A button from the box appeared on my desk, though I had not placed it there. The doll's arm was on my windowsill. At first, I blamed forgetfulness or absent-minded placement. But then the items moved more deliberately. Each morning, I would wake to find them arranged differently, patterns that were impossible to create on my own while asleep. The psychological strain built slowly. I began documenting the changes, photographing the box and its contents each day. What initially seemed like harmless curiosity became an obsession. I stopped leaving my apartment, stopped answering calls or texts. The patterns in the box were changing too, becoming more complex. Letters appeared, tiny scratches on the coin, indentations on the doll's arm that spelled out words I could barely comprehend. At first, it was nonsense, fragmented syllables and half words, but gradually, it became a coherent message, almost a warning. You are seen, you are noted. I remember reading those words and feeling my blood run cold. It was not the forest anymore, not the clearing where I had found the box, but my own space, my own home. Something had followed me, invisible yet precise, leaving reminders of its presence. Every object I had brought from the woods now seemed to hum with intent, as though watching me, cataloging my every move. I tried to discard the box, throwing it into the trash, burning it, even burying it in the garden. Each time, the box reappeared, exactly as I had first discovered it. Waiting sleep became impossible. My dreams were invaded by visions of the forest clearing, of unseen figures crouched just beyond the trees, arranging objects I had never seen before. They moved with purpose, methodical and patient. Sometimes, the box itself appeared in my dreams, opening to reveal items I did not recognize. Objects that were clearly not mine but somehow felt familiar, like memories not yet lived. I would wake in the night, hands cold, heart racing, convinced I had touched something beyond comprehension. I attempted to rationalize everything. Perhaps the forest had some natural property, some psychological effect on perception, memory, or cognition. Perhaps I was hallucinating under the stress of isolation and obsession. But then came the moments. I could not explain when I would place a new item in the box, and the patterns shifted before my eyes, before I had even gone to sleep. When I would lock the apartment door and feel the unmistakable pressure of something moving on the other side. The box was not just an object, it was a presence, and it was patient. Months passed, and the box's influence deepened. I could no longer leave my apartment for more than a few hours. Every time I returned, I found the objects subtly altered. Sometimes the changes were minor: a button flipped upside down, a ribbon twisted differently, but other times, the changes were impossible to account for. Small letters appeared carved into surfaces, scratches forming messages I could not ignore. And always, the sense that I was being observed persisted, growing more acute with every passing day. Friends who visited noticed the change in me. They commented on the obsession, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands trembled when I moved the objects. I tried to explain the box, the patterns, the warnings, but words failed. I could not convey the sense of watching, the slow erosion of my sense of safety. Eventually, I stopped inviting anyone over. I stopped speaking to people altogether. The box had become my world, my prison, and I was its captive. I have tried to leave it behind. I have tried to return it to the forest clearing, convinced that perhaps it belonged there, that removing it had been a mistake. Each time, I cannot find the place. The forest seems to have shifted, trails vanished, landmarks erased. The box, it seems, cannot be returned. It is no longer tied to a location, but to me. Wherever I go, the box or its presence follows. Small items appear. Messages are left. Reminders that it is patient, and that patience is all it needs. I write this now as a warning to anyone who might stumble across a forest. A clearing, a small wooden box that seems harmless, almost quaint. Do not touch it, do not take it home. It is not an object. It is a mind, a will, a silent observer that catalogs everything you do. And even if you think you understand, even if you try to rationalize it, you will learn that it is far beyond comprehension. It is not bound by the forest. It is not bound by time. It waits for you, patiently, inevitably. The last time I tried to ignore it, I woke to find the items arranged in a pattern spelling my own name, not a warning, not a message, a declaration. And I realized, with a clarity that left me breathless, that I am no longer merely observing the box. I am part of it. Its presence is inside my home, my mind, my daily life. The forest did not give up its secrets, it simply transferred them, and I know, with absolute certainty, that it will never let me go. I write this as a record, as a confession, as a warning. Some discoveries are not meant to be made, some objects are not meant to be touched, and some things found in the woods will follow you home, quietly, patiently, until the line between observer and observed ceases to exist. Let's move to our sixth story. It was supposed to be a simple hike. I had spent the morning preparing, packing my backpack with water, snacks, a notebook, and my camera, intending to explore a remote stretch of forest just beyond town. The locals called it Hollow Pines, a name that sounded harmless enough. But I had heard whispers about the era's strange lights, sudden disappearances, people wandering off the trails and never returning. I laughed them off at the time, chalking it up to old tales and superstition. I wasn't superstitious. I wasn't afraid. The trail began normally. The forest was thick but beautiful. Sunlight filtering through the leaves in slanted beams, creating patterns on the mossy ground. Birds chirped overhead, and I could hear the distant trickle of a stream. I walked with purpose, occasionally stopping to take photos, feeling a pleasant solitude in the isolation. It wasn't until about an hour in that I noticed the subtle oddities. The trail was becoming less distinct, almost as if the forest was reclaiming it faster than I was advancing. Branches bent unnaturally, leaves seemed to whisper when I brushed past them, and every so often I thought I glimpsed something moving, just beyond my vision. But when I looked, there was nothing. At first I dismissed it, attributing the sensations to nerves or fatigue. But as I continued, the feeling of being watched intensified. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain someone or something was following me, though the forest was silent save for the wind. The trees, once welcoming in their quiet stillness, now seemed oppressive. Their trunks darkened and gnarled, branches curling toward me as though reaching. I stopped to rest, taking a seat on a fallen log. And that's when I heard it, a faint whisper. So soft I thought it was my imagination. Help! My blood ran cold. I jumped to my feet, spinning around, but the forest was empty. No movement. No sign of anyone else. My rational mind tried to take over. Perhaps it was a hiker in distress, lost. I called out, voice echoing among the trees, but no reply came, only the rustle of leaves. Still, the whisper had sounded human, and it had called my name, my exact name. I froze. No one knew I was hiking here. No one could have followed me this far. My heart pounded as I debated whether to leave or investigate further. Curiosity won. I followed the sound, pushing deeper into the undergrowth. The trail became almost non-existent. The forest closing in around me, and the whispering continued intermittently, sometimes urgent, sometimes pleading. I came to a small clearing, where the sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy. In the center, I saw a figure, a girl, crouched on the ground, her head bowed. Her hair was dark and wet, her clothes tattered, and she seemed utterly still. Called to her, asking if she was all right, but she didn't respond. Something about the way she sat made me uneasy, as if she were too still to be entirely human. I stepped closer, her head slowly lifted, and when her face came into view, I nearly screamed. Her eyes were black, featureless, hollow, reflecting nothing but shadow. Her mouth opened, and a sound emerged, not words, not a scream, but a wet, gurgling noise that vibrated in my chest. I stumbled back, fear overtaking reason, but before I could move, she darted toward the tree line, faster than any human could. I chased her blindly, tripping over roots, my camera falling to the ground. But when I reached the edge of the clearing, she was gone. Panicked, I retraced my steps, trying to find the main trail, but it had vanished. Every tree looked identical. Every bend in the path mirrored another. I realized then that I was lost. My phone had no signal, the sky dimming as the afternoon turned to dusk. And then I heard it again, a soft, constant whisper surrounding me, calling my name from every direction. I spun, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed omnipresent, coming from inside my head as much as from the forest itself. Night fell quickly, far faster than it should have. The shadows grew thick, pressing against me from all sides. Shapes moved in the darkness, humanoid but indistinct, disappearing when I turned to look directly. My sense of direction was gone, and panic clawed at my chest. I ran blindly, tripping, scrambling through undergrowth, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Occasionally, I glimpsed the girl again, always at the edge of my vision, sometimes reaching toward me, always disappearing before I could confront her. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the oppressive darkness of the forest. I became disoriented, seeing repeated landmarks as if I were trapped in a loop. A fallen tree, a moss-covered rock, a patch of ferns, they appeared, over and over. And always, the whispers. I began to talk back, begging, pleading, trying to reason with them, and the forest seemed to respond, shifting slightly, guiding me deeper into its heart. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing that felt different. The air was thick, almost viscous, carrying a metallic smell. In the center was a stone altar, crude and covered in moss, surrounded by a circle of charred earth. The girl crouched atop it now, her black eyes fixed on me. I froze. As I watched, dozens of shapes emerged from the shadows, humanoid but grotesque, limbed, twisted, faces hidden in darkness. They surrounded the altar, chanting in low guttural tones that I could not understand, their whispers layered over one another in a deafening crescendo. I realized then that the forest was not just a place, it was a trap. The trail, the clearing, the girl, the whispers. They were all part of something larger, something ancient. The figures moved closer, but the girl remained atop the altar, her hollow eyes staring into mine. I wanted to run, to fight, to scream, but my body refused. Fear rooted me to the spot. The chanting grew louder, vibrating through my bones, and I felt my mind fray at the edges. I awoke hours later, or maybe days, I could not tell, lying at the edge of the forest, my backpack torn, camera missing, clothes shredded. The sun was high in the sky, and the forest appeared normal again, silent and serene, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I could still hear the faint whispers echoing in my head, and sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I see her black eyes at the edge of the tree line. Since that day, I avoid the forest entirely. I moved towns, changed my routines, but I cannot escape the memory, nor the whispers. Occasionally, I will wake in the night, certain I hear footsteps approaching my bedroom door. Slow and deliberate, accompanied by that faint metallic scent, that pull of the forest calling me back. And I know, deep down, that it is only a matter of time before the trail opens again, before the whispers become a command. And I am drawn back into the heart of hollow pines, where those who wander too far are never seen again. Let's move to our 7th story. I still remember the day we decided to document the forest. It started as a simple project. My friends and I, all college students, had been exploring urban legends for a film class, and Hollow Ridge Woods had always been infamous in our town for strange occurrences. People spoke of voices in the night, missing hikers, and inexplicable shadows. At first, we treated it as a thrill-seeking adventure, camera in hand, convinced we'd capture nothing more than harmless footage of trees and wildlife. We were wrong. We arrived in the late afternoon, sunlight cutting through the canopy and shafts, dust motes floating like tiny ghosts. The forest was quieter than expected, almost unnaturally so. Birds were silent, and even the breeze seemed to hesitate. Our first few hours were uneventful. We laughed, set up cameras on tripods, and followed the narrow trail deeper into the woods, joking about the haunted forest, as if naming it aloud would somehow protect us. The forest seemed to listen. As evening approached, the first oddities began. One of our cameras, left on a tree branch, recorded static for several minutes before flickering to a shadow moving quickly between the trees. None of us had seen it in person, yet the footage was undeniable. We brushed it off at first, rationalizing that it was a trick of light, a branch swaying too quickly, or a squirrel darting across the lens. But then came the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, like distant voices carried on the wind. They were too deliberate to be the breeze, forming words that none of us could fully understand. We continued filming, moving cautiously, hoping to capture the phenomenon. Our footage began to show more than shadows. Reflections in puddles revealed figures behind us that we had never noticed in reality. On one camera, a fleeting image of a girl crouching between trees appeared for just a second, her black hair obscuring her face. Each time we turned to look, she was gone. Fear began to creep in. The forest that had seemed so serene hours earlier now felt alive. Watching, waiting. Night fell quickly, bringing a suffocating darkness. Our flashlights barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting long, flickering shadows. We debated leaving, but curiosity's stupidity, in hindsight, kept us moving deeper. The whispers grew louder, forming syllables and short phrases, repeating our names. One of my friends, Mark, laughed nervously and called out, trying to mock the sound, but the forest responded differently. The wind stopped. The whispers ceased. For a heartbeat, and then a low guttural growl rolled through the trees, followed by a sudden, sharp crack. Mark screamed, and we turned, but the trail behind us was empty. We set up camp in a small clearing, hoping to wait out the night. That's when the cameras began to malfunction. LCD screens flickered violently, recording distorted audio filled with static and whispers. And one of our tripods toppled as if pushed. My hands shook as I tried to adjust it, realizing that the forest wasn't just a setting, it was interacting with us, manipulating reality around the cameras. Every time I reviewed the footage later, I noticed discrepancies. Objects changed positions between takes. Shadows appeared in frames where there were none in real life. Sleep was impossible. The forest seemed to breathe around us, every crack of a branch echoing like a footstep, every rustle of leaves like movement behind us. Around midnight, the whispers intensified, forming coherent words. Leave, now alone. Fear turned to panic. One of us, Sarah, tried to leave the clearing to find a path back, and we watched through the camera as she vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the trees. Her scream lingered in our ears, but when we ran toward her, there was nothing. Trail twisted, loops forming where none existed, as if the forest itself were a labyrinth. Desperation set in. We stumbled blindly, our flashlights catching glimpses of shadowy figures at the periphery. They moved quickly, disappearing whenever we turned directly toward them. The footage from our cameras captured their faces, assorted human yet inhuman, with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. Occasionally, the cameras caught fleeting images of small objects placed in patterns, stones, twigs, feathers, and leaves arranged in a circle, like markers. We never saw anyone place them, yet they appeared closer and closer to us with every step. By dawn, only 2 of us remained. Exhausted, terrified, we reached what we thought was the edge of the forest, but the trail emerged into another clearing, not the one we remembered from the hike, with a fallen tree marking its center. There, crouched in the shadows, was the girl from the reflections. Her black hair obscured her face, and she remained perfectly still. When we called to her, she tilted her head unnaturally, and the shadows around her shifted in ways that defied physics. We turned and ran, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. Every direction looked the same. The cameras captured our frantic movements, yet reviewing the footage later revealed an impossible detail. We appeared to be walking in place, our feet barely moving forward, while the shadows behind us closed in. The girl appeared intermittently in frames, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, always watching. We began to question our sanity, each step feeling heavier than the last. Every sound amplified in our minds. Hours or maybe days passed in that endless expanse of forest. Hunger, thirst, and fatigue blurred the line between reality and hallucination. The whispers never stopped, repeating our names, mocking our fear. Occasionally, one of the cameras captured a brief reflection of our faces, pale, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. It was as though the forest was not merely observing us, but transforming us, imprinting itself onto our very being. When we finally stumbled out of Hollow Ridge Woods, the town felt unreal. The sun shone, people walked normally, and the forest behind us appeared ordinary. But the footage told a different story. Shadows moved in the background, eyes watched from every frame, and the girl appeared in multiple shots, even in locations we had never visited. Reviewing the audio, we could hear whispers layered beneath the ambient sounds, repeating over and over. Come back, come back. We destroyed the cameras. We burned the footage. Yet the memory on the whispers. Every time I close my eyes, I see her black hair, those hollow eyes, and the impossible loops of forest trails that swallowed my friends one by one. Hollow Ridge Woods is not a playset, as a predator, and we were foolish enough to step inside. I no longer venture into forests, no longer trust the idea of unexplored places. But sometimes, in my dreams, the footage returns. The girl, the shadows, the whispers, they follow me, just beyond perception, waiting for another chance, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Hollow Ridge Woods will call again, patient and inevitable, for anyone who dares to enter. Let's move to our 8th story. The first time I heard about the hollow tree, it was from my grandmother, sitting by the fireplace as the wind howled outside. She described it as an ancient, gnarled tree deep in the forest, hollowed out and blackened, where the townspeople never went. According to her, children sometimes vanished near it, leaving only whispers and broken toys behind. At the time, I thought it was just another story to keep kids from wandering too far, folklore meant to scare. But curiosity, as it always does, grew stronger than fear. And eventually, I had to see it for myself. I entered the forest early one morning, the sun barely rising, casting long, thin shadows across the moss-covered ground. The trail was faint, almost non-existent, and the deeper I went, the quieter it became. Birds stopped singing. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, every step amplified by the eerie stillness. Hours passed before I saw it. The hollow tree. Its trunk was massive, blackened as if charred by fire, yet there were no signs of burning in the surrounding soil. The hollow at its center was large enough for a person to step inside, and the air emanating from it was cold, unnaturally cold, like a deep winter wind in the middle of spring. I stepped closer, unable to resist the pull, and noticed the carvings, etched into the bark. Names, dates, symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Some of the carvings were old, weathered by decades, others fresh, with bark still damp and sap oozing faintly. Among them were initials I didn't recognize, and symbols that made my skin crawl. Geometric shapes that seemed to hum when I traced them with my fingers. It was as though the tree remembered, recorded, and demanded recognition. Then I heard the whispers, faint at first, like children murmuring in the distance. I froze. The sound came from inside the hollow, curling outward in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I crouched, peering into the blackness. The shadows within the hollow shifted unnaturally, as if something was moving just beyond my vision. I could feel eyes, or perhaps awareness, from the darkness itself. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered, swallowed by the cold air emanating from within. As I circled the tree, I noticed remnants of toys on the ground around its maw. Dolls, wooden figurines, a cracked music box with a key still in place. Each object was meticulously arranged in a rough circle, as though part of some ritual. The closer I got, the more the forest seemed to tighten around me. Branches reached out like fingers, leaves whispered against my skin, and the wind carried the faint, unmistakable smell of decay and damp earth. I realized then that the hollow tree was not just a tree. It was a sentinel, a repository, a predator. I returned the next day with a small notebook, intending to document the carvings and objects. Hours passed, and every time I looked away, the arrangement of the toys had changed. Dolls that had faced east now faced west. Wooden figurines had shifted positions, and the music box had moved to the center of the circle. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps animals, perhaps wind, but deep down I knew that was impossible. The precision was deliberate, and it was aware of me. Every shift seemed like a silent message. You are seen. As days went by, I became obsessed. I visited the hollow tree repeatedly, documenting every object, every carving, every shift. I stopped answering calls from friends. My family noticed my absence, but I could not stay away. The whispers followed me home at first, faint and fleeting. Then, at night, they became louder, more insistent. I would wake to hear the creak of wood, small footsteps across my apartment floor, and faint childish laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I began leaving small offerings on my windowsill, trinkets, buttons, scraps of ribbon. The forest demanded acknowledgement, and I feared what would happen if I ignored it. One evening, I decided to step inside the hollow. The air was frigid, carrying the scent of earth and rot. The darkness was almost tactile, pressing against my skin, suffocating, alive. As I stepped in, I felt the carvings on the inside pulse faintly under my fingers, and whispers swelled to a chorus, overlapping, echoing names I did not recognize. Shapes flickered at the edge of perception, figures, crouched, watching, shifting. I stumbled back, heart racing, and realized with horror that the forest itself had followed me into the hollow, bending and twisting the space, as though it were a living entity, a labyrinth that trapped curiosity. I began to notice subtle changes in my own perception. Objects in my home shifted. Faint carvings appeared on my desk and walls. And I began seeing children's shadows at the corners of my vision. They were never fully visible, just glimpses of a head tilted unnaturally, a fleeting pair of eyes. They beckoned silently, always at the edge of awareness. I understood then that the hollow tree did not simply hold objects. It held souls, memories, fragments of life it had claimed over decades. And now it had claimed a piece of me. The obsession grew uncontrollable. Friends stopped visiting, emails went unanswered, and I found myself dreaming of the forest. In my dreams, the hollow tree expanded into impossible sizes. Roots crawling like serpents, branches curling into the sky and reaching for me. The whispers became coherent voices, calling my name, inviting me to join them. Sometimes, in sleep, I would wake clutching trinkets I did not remember touching, small objects that had been left at the base of the tree, in some other reality, some other time. One night, I woke to find the hollow tree outside my window. Impossible, yet unmistakable. The air was cold, the shadows of its branches reaching across the apartment floor, dark and curling. The whispering crescendoed, voices overlapping in a maddening chant. I tried to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. Shapes emerged from the darkness outside, crouching, shifting, watching. The sense of awareness, the forest's sentience, was undeniable. I had been marked, and the hollow tree would not release me. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time lost meaning. I could not leave my apartment for long without feeling the pull of the forest, the tug of the hollow tree calling me back. Shadows followed me, whispers echoed, and objects shifted when I wasn't looking. My dreams became filled with the twisted fairy tale of the tree. Children wandering into the hollow. Their laughter turned to screams, objects placed in meticulous patterns, and the forest bending reality itself to ensnare the curious. I understood finally. The hollow tree was patient, eternal, and insatiable. I write this now as a warning to anyone who might wander into the woods near my town. The hollow tree is not folklore, it is real. It observes, it collects, and it remembers. Curiosity is its bait. Those who look too closely, who step too near, are drawn in, piece by piece, until nothing remains outside its grasp. I have survived, but I am changed, haunted by whispers, by shadows, by the knowledge that the forest and its hollow sentinel never forget. Some things in the woods are not meant to be found. Then some discoveries will follow you, patiently, inevitably, until the line between observer and observed is erased forever. Let's move to our 9th story. It began with a rumor. As most terrifying stories do, a whisper passed from one hiker to another, in the small town at the edge of the forest. They called it the Watcher of Raven's Hollow, a figure that followed those who dared to wander the woods after dark. No one claimed to have seen it directly, only fleeting glimpses, a shadow between the trees, a pair of glowing eyes reflected in puddles, footprints appearing in the mud with no apparent origin. At first, I dismissed it as nonsense, the kind of story meant to keep children from straying too far. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and I had to see if the legend was true. I entered Raven's Hollow just after sunset. The sky a deep purple, the forest bathed in fading light. The trail was narrow and overgrown, leaves crunching softly underfoot. The further I went, the quieter it became, until even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through the trees. I felt an immediate sense of being observed, though no one was around. It was subtle at first, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, a rustle of leaves without wind, but I told myself it was just nerves, imagination playing tricks in the dim light. As I progressed deeper, the forest seemed to shift, subtly, but undeniably. Familiar trees appeared in different positions, paths twisted unnaturally, and landmarks repeated themselves, giving the sensation that I was walking in circles. My phone's GPS became unreliable. The signal dropped, the map distorted. Shadows stretched oddly across the forest floor, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still between two trees. When I blinked, it was gone. Panic began to creep in, but I pressed on, convinced that retreating now would only ensure I got lost further. Hours passed, though it felt like mere minutes. And I began to hear it, a faint, deliberate rustling, the sound of footsteps that never seemed to match my own. I tried to call out, to speak, but my voice sounded hollow, almost swallowed by the trees themselves. Occasionally, the sound of my own footsteps echoed incorrectly, as if something was mirroring me just beyond sight. Then I noticed the first marker. A small pile of stones in a peculiar formation. Fresh and deliberate. Not there moments before. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke across my forehead. Someone or something was leaving signs, and it was. Following me closely, I stumbled upon a small clearing where the forest opened slightly to the night sky. There I saw movement, again a tall figure, unnaturally thin, its face obscured by shadow. Standing just beyond the circle of moonlight, I froze. The figure did not move closer. It simply observed. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, telling myself it was a trick of light and perspective. Yet every instinct screamed that this presence was real, intelligent, and aware of me. My pulse hammered, and I felt the undeniable pressure of being hunted. The first night in the forest was a descent into paranoia. I tried to find a place to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed animate. Every branch cracking in the wind felt like a step behind me. I set up my small camera to document the legend, hoping to prove to myself, and others, that the watcher was either imaginary or explainable. Reviewing the footage later revealed chilling details. I could not have witnessed firsthand. The figure appeared fleetingly behind trees. At angles I had never looked, and sometimes directly reflected in puddles. Its featureless face, staring at the lens. I returned the next day, against my better judgment. Obsession had taken root. The forest seemed to recognize me, paths subtly altered to lead me deeper into the hollow. At one point, I noticed footprints in the mud, tall, thin, humanoid but impossibly elongated, following my own, stopping whenever I stopped, mirroring every movement. Fear clawed at my chest, yet I could not turn back. The watcher was patient. It had all the time in the world. It communicated with silence, with subtle manipulation of space and perception, creating a labyrinth that ensnared the mind as much as the body. Over the following nights, I began camping in the forest, documenting every movement, every sign of the watcher. The figure never approached directly, yet its presence was overwhelming. Sometimes, I would wake to find small, deliberate alterations, sticks arranged in strange patterns around my campsite, small stones forming symbols I could not decipher, leaves twisted unnaturally as if pointing to something. The forest itself became a participant, bending and shaping reality subtly around me, reinforcing my paranoia. Sleep deprived, I began hearing whispers at the edge of my perception. They were faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, yet unmistakably human. They spoke my name, warned, laughed, and cried. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, never forming coherent sentences, yet their intent was clear. The watcher knows you, it sees you. I became convinced that the forest had consciousness, and the watcher was its agent, enforcing its will, cataloging my presence as if I were another curiosity to add to its collection. One night, I followed faintly glowing eyes deeper into the forest. They always appeared just beyond reach, always guiding me further into disorientation. I discovered remnants of previous victims, small personal items, partially decomposed, arranged in patterns around a stone altar, eerily similar to the markings I had seen on my first night. I realized then that the watcher was not alone, was part of a system, a hierarchy of observation and control, ancient and patient, spanning generations of those who had wandered too far. Time lost meaning. Days and nights blurred together. My camera footage became erratic, distorted by static and anomalies. The watcher appeared in impossible locations, simultaneously, captured in one frame behind a tree, reflected in a puddle in another, yet unseen in real life. Each time I tried to leave, paths looped back, markers rearranged themselves, the forest bending reality to keep me within its grasp. I began to understand that escape was an illusion. The watcher and Raven's Hollow were eternal, existing outside, ordinary understanding, patient in their observation, meticulous in their control. Eventually, I left the forest, physically unharmed, but mentally fractured. The Watcher did not follow me in any conventional sense, yet its presence lingered. I could feel eyes watching from the periphery of vision, shadows moving unnaturally, whispers in the wind that spoke my name. My sleep was plagued by dreams of the hollowed trees, the tall figure, and patterns of stones and branches forming cryptic symbols. Every forest I saw afterward, even from a distance, seemed alive, attentive, ready to reclaim the curious. I share this as a warning. Some places in the woods are sentient in ways we cannot comprehend. Some legends exist not merely to frighten, but to protect, to enforce boundaries that the uninitiated are not meant to cross. Raven's Hollow is real. The Watcher is real. And it waits, patient and unrelenting, for the next wanderer who dares to step beyond the trail and into its domain. Let's move to our 10th story. It all began with a box. I had been exploring the forest near my town for strange artifacts, the kind that collectors and urban explorers whispered about but rarely shared. Among the roots of an ancient oak, half buried under moss and leaves, I found it. A small, blackened, wooden box, unassuming yet radiating a weight that made my stomach twist. The box was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and lines that seemed to move subtly when I stared too long. I didn't know it at the time, but taking it home would change everything. The first night, I placed the box on my desk and examined it closely. It was lighter than it looked, yet oddly dense, the carvings feeling unnervingly cold to the touch. The moment I touched it, I felt a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat. I dismissed it as imagination, tired from the day's hike. That night, I dreamed. Dreams so vivid they felt like memories from another life, faces twisted in anguish, shadows moving unnaturally, a voice whispering my name from beneath the floorboards. I awoke drenched in sweat, the box sitting innocuously on my desk, utterly still. In the following days, small, unexplainable events began. Objects in my apartment shifted positions while I slept. My notebooks contained lines I didn't write, spirals and symbols, echoing those on the box. At first, I rationalized its sleepwalking, forgetfulness. But then came the whispers, faint, barely audible. Seeping through the silence, voices that spoke to me from corners of my apartment, murmuring instructions, warnings, sometimes threats. The box was at the center of it all, and I could feel its awareness, patient, persistent, and cold. One evening, I took a closer look at the carvings. Under lamplight, I noticed subtle changes, symbols shifting, spirals expanding into patterns I hadn't seen before. When I traced them with my fingers, the vibrations returned, stronger, this time, pulsing through my hands and up my arms. I heard a faint knock from the door, but from the surface of the box itself. I froze, heart hammering. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, yet the sound repeated, deliberate, almost beckoning me to open it. Against my better judgment, I lifted the lid. Inside was a small mirror, its surface cloudy, rippling slightly like water. As I gazed into it, my reflection twisted, stretching unnaturally, my eyes darkening, my lips moving in ways I hadn't intended. A figure emerged in the glass behind me, tall, shadowy, faceless. I spun around, but my room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, it was normal again. Yet I could feel its gaze lingering, watching, waiting. The box had a presence, and it had marked me. Days turned into nights of paranoia. I attempted to leave the box in my storage closet, only to find it inexplicably returned to my desk the next morning. The whispers escalated into coherent voices, demanding attention, commanding actions, suggesting I write, carve, and follow patterns I didn't understand. My journal filled with spirals and symbols I had never consciously drawn, arranged in precise sequences dictated by the box. I became obsessive, unable to focus on anything else, my world shrinking until only the box and its influence remained. Visitors noticed changes. Friends commented on my distant, hollow gaze, my constant agitation. They avoided my apartment after I began muttering to myself, reciting the patterns from the box. I tried to explain, but words failed. Anyone who approached too closely felt a chill, a weight pressing down, and quickly left. I realized then that the box's influence extended beyond MIT, shaped the space around it, altering perception, bending reality subtly, isolating me from anyone who could intervene. Sleep became impossible. The mirror inside the box showed things that did not exist, hallways extending impossibly, rooms appearing within my apartment, figures crouched in corners that vanished when I turned. Sometimes I would awake with the box open, symbols etched into its surface that I did not carve. It was teaching me, shaping me, controlling me in ways both subtle and overt. I became convinced that opening the box fully would release whatever was inside, and I could no longer resist the pull. One night, compelled by an almost hypnotic force, I arranged a ritual around the box. Using candles, ink, and scraps of paper, the air thickened, cold and heavy, and the whispers crescendoed into a chorus of voices, each overlapping the other in an incomprehensible chant. Shadows twisted along the walls, flickering in impossible patterns. The mirror in the box began to ripple like liquid, and from within emerged a form, featureless yet humanoid, stretching impossibly, observing, alive. I could not move, paralyzed by fear and fascination, unable to tear my gaze away. When the ritual ended, or perhaps never truly ended, the room was silent. The box appeared closed, unremarkable once more, yet I felt its presence more strongly than ever. I understood then that it was patient, immortal, and that my life would now revolve entirely around it. The mirror had shown me glimpses of other worlds, other dimensions where the box already existed, always watching, always waiting for the next hand to open it. I no longer sleep. My reflection in ordinary mirrors sometimes shifts, mimicking the distortions I saw in the box. Objects move subtly when I am not looking. Patterns appear in my notebooks, spirals and symbols echoing the carvings on the box. I am obsessed, entrapped, haunted. I have tried to destroy it, fire, water, blunt force, but it always returns, intact, patient, waiting. I now understand the truth. The box does not exist in space alone. It exists in perception, in consciousness, in fear. Anyone who finds such an object aware, curiosity is its key, attention its fuel. The box observes, learns, manipulates, and transforms. Once touched, once opened, you belong to it. The forest may hide many things, but some artifacts are more dangerous than any creature or shadow. They exist in your mind, in your home, in the very reality you trust, and they will patiently wait until you are ready to serve them. As I now do, I leave this account as both warning and confession. The box will claim what it will, and curiosity is the path I am trapped, marked, and forever altered. My world has narrowed to the pulse of that cursed object, and I know that nothing in the woods or anywhere else will ever feel safe again. Let's move to our 11th story. The day I found the journal. It was half buried under fallen leaves in the forest, as though someone or something had deliberately left it for me to find. The cover was made of worn leather, edges frayed, the color darkened with age. When I picked it up, I felt an odd weight, like the object itself carried a history too heavy to ignore. On the first page, written in meticulous cursive, were the words, "To whoever finds this, know that some things should remain unseen." My curiosity ignited instantly, overriding the unease creeping through my chest. I opened it carefully, the scent of aged paper and earth filling my senses. The entries began innocuously, describing ordinary forest hikes, observations of wildlife, and weather patterns. But soon, the tone shifted. The author began recounting strange occurrences, shadows moving independently of their source, whispers echoing in empty clearings, and fleeting glimpses of figures that disappeared when approached. The final entries, however, were different entirely. They detailed encounters with something the author called the listener, a presence that could hear thoughts, sense intentions, and manipulate the very environment around them. At first, I dismissed it as the ramblings of someone unwell, but as I walked deeper into the forest that day, I began to notice patterns I couldn't ignore. The paths I took seemed to twist unexpectedly. Trees appeared in impossible positions, and the quietness of the forest pressed against me like a living thing. A faint breeze carried whispers, so faint that I wasn't sure if they were real or imagined. My heart raced. The entries described the same sensations, the forest adapting to the presence of intruders, responding to fear, bending reality. I felt that same weight of observation now. I set the journal aside briefly to rest near a clearing, and that's when I noticed movement. At the edge of my vision, a figure, indistinct, humanoid, yet distorted, crouched just beyond the line of sight. When I turned my head fully, it vanished. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was my mind playing tricks, yet a cold shiver traveled down my spine. The journal had warned me. The listener watches not with eyes, but with intent. It knows what you fear, and it will draw it forth. Over the following days, I returned to the forest repeatedly, documenting the strange occurrences. Small items would shift inexplicably. A fallen branch rearranged into a precise shape. A stone moved slightly in the soil, patterns forming that seemed deliberate. At times, I would feel the weight of invisible eyes upon me, subtle but unrelenting. My reflection in puddles sometimes warped, showing shapes crouching behind me that vanished when I looked directly. Fear grew, but so did a compulsion to continue. The journal pulled me deeper into obsession. Nighttime brought worse experiences. While resting in a small clearing, I could hear whispers around me, rising and falling with no discernible source. They repeated my thoughts, my fears, and occasionally, my name. The journal described similar auditory phenomena, suggesting that the listener could manipulate perception, using sound and sight to entrap the mind. My own sanity began to fray. Shadows at the edge of vision would shift in ways that defied physics, always suggesting presence, without ever revealing form. One evening, I noticed carvings on the base of a tree near my resting spot, symbols identical to those illustrated in the journal. The air around them felt heavy, almost tactile, and I sensed a distinct, oppressive awareness. I attempted to step away, but my legs felt sluggish, as though the forest itself resisted my movement. I realized then that the listener was not merely observing, it was actively interacting with my mind, shaping the space around me according to my fear, guiding my actions subtly, yet decisively, in subsequent visits. I attempted to mark the trail with ribbons and chalk, but the forest nullified them. Paths looped back, markers disappeared, and objects rearranged themselves into new, deliberate patterns. The listener's manipulation extended beyond mere observation. It controlled perception, creating illusions to ensure that the intruder remained disoriented and anxious. Sleep-deprived and paranoid, I began hearing phrases in the whispers, coherent enough to understand. Closer, closer, you cannot leave. The journal had mentioned a boundary, a clearing at the heart of the forest, where the listener's influence was strongest. I ventured there cautiously, documenting everything. The clearing was eerily still, the air thick and cold. Shadows pooled unnaturally along the edges, and the patterns of stones and sticks were more intricate, more deliberate than anything I had seen. I felt drawn to the center, compelled almost irresistibly, and as I stepped forward, the whispers intensified, overlapping in a crescendo of voices, some pleading, some mocking, some commanding. In the clearing, I noticed a tree unlike any other, gnarled oak, whose roots seemed to reach outward, intertwining with the patterns on the ground. The journal had described it as the listener's anchor, a point where the forest's sentience concentrated. Approaching it, I felt a tangible pressure, as though the air itself resisted my movement. Shadows flickered across the trunk, forming humanoid shapes that twisted unnaturally, then disappeared when directly looked at. The journal warned explicitly, do not touch. Do not look too long. The forest will take what it needs. I ignored the warning, driven by obsessive curiosity. My hand brushed the tree bark, and in an instant, the world shifted. The clearing expanded impossibly, shadows stretched in unnatural directions, and whispering voices surged, filling my mind with visions I could barely comprehend. Faces appeared in the bark, screaming silently, eyes following me with intensity. I realized that the listener did not merely watch, recorded, it trapped, it absorbed, and my presence was now a part of its collection. When I staggered back from the tree, the forest seemed different, more alive, more aware. The paths that once twisted unpredictably now led me deeper into the influence of the listener. Time itself became fluid. I could not tell how long I had been there. Days and nights blurred. Every sound, every shadow, every subtle shift in the forest heightened my awareness of being monitored. The journal became my only guide, though it offered no solutions. Only warnings repeated in increasingly desperate tones. The final entries in the journal detailed the author's descent, how the listener ensnared their mind, bending reality and perception until escape was impossible. I understood with horror that the forest was patient and immortal, and the listener was its will made manifest. It had learned, adapted, and now I was a participant in its observation, feeding it fear, documenting patterns it could use. My own thoughts were no longer private. Every intention, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt was laid bare to the forest. Eventually, I emerged from the forest, physically unharmed but mentally altered. The journal I carried with me continued to exert influence: whispers in empty rooms, shadows in the corner of vision, fleeting shapes in reflections. I had survived, but the experience left an indelible mark. The forest had claimed a piece of my perception, my understanding of reality, forever tainted by its sentience. The listener was patient. It waits for the next intruder, shaping perception, bending the mind, and recording every fear. I write this as both a warning and a confession. Some places in the woods are not merely inhabited by animals or ghosts, they are alive, intelligent, and manipulative. Raven's Hollow, the listener. The patterns and shadows, they are real. They exist outside the comprehension of ordinary humans, yet they interact with those who trespass, subtly, irresistibly, leaving marks that last long after the forest is behind you. Curiosity is dangerous. Observation is perilous. And some things, once witnessed, will never leave your mind. Let's move to our 12th story. It began as a simple hiking trip with my two closest friends. We wanted to explore a part of the forest no one in our small town dared to venture into. An area locals whispered about, but avoided entirely. It was called Black Pine Hollow. A place dense with ancient trees whose branches intertwined so heavily that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. We carried cameras, flashlights, and enough food for an overnight stay, documenting the journey for fun. None of us expected what would happen or how profoundly it would change the way we understood fear. The first day was uneventful, almost serene. Birds chirped intermittently, leaves rustled in a gentle wind, and the forest seemed alive but welcoming. We laughed, joked, and filmed our adventure, the cameras capturing every smile and stumble. However, as we ventured deeper, the forest became increasingly oppressive. The air grew heavy, carrying an odd, metallic temps. Even the birds fell silent, and a low, almost imperceptible hum seemed to vibrate through the trunks of the trees. Shadows thickened unnaturally in the corners of our vision, moving just slightly out of sync with the light dot. By late afternoon, we noticed the first sign that something was watching us. A series of footprints too large, too elongated, and disturbingly human-like, yet twisted appeared in the mud near our path. They didn't match any of us, and their spacing was irregular, almost stalking, suggesting deliberate movement. At first, we laughed nervously, blaming animals or our imaginations. But the sense of being observed persisted, prickling at the back of our necks. One friend, Mark, insisted we turn back, but curiosity and, perhaps arrogance, kept us moving forward. As night fell, the forest transformed into a labyrinth. Our flashlights barely penetrated the thick canopy, and the path we had followed seemed to dissolve behind us. Every turn appeared familiar yet subtly different, as if the forest itself had shifted while we weren't looking. That's when we heard it, a low growl, distant but resonant, carrying through the hollow in a way that made the ground vibrate slightly under our feet. The cameras recorded nothing visible, but the sound alone was enough to ignite panic. We quickened our pace, calling out for each other. Yet the forest swallowed our voices almost immediately. Soon we caught glimpses, fleeting shapes between the trees, moving impossibly fast, too dark and fluid to be mere shadows. The creature was unlike anything we had ever seen, with a humanoid form distorted by long, twisted limbs, and eyes that reflected light in unnatural ways. It did not run. It stalked, maintaining distance, forcing us to notice it without giving us the opportunity to fully comprehend its form. Our fear grew exponentially, amplified by our own perceptions and the eerie sensation that the forest itself was aiding the creature, bending space to keep us contained. Throughout the night, the forest was alive with unnatural sounds, twigs snapping where no one had stepped, faint whispering carried on the wind, and the persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. Our cameras caught moments we could barely process: dark forms crouching in the distance, silhouettes with elongated limbs slipping between trunks, and occasional close-ups of reflective eyes staring directly into the lens before disappearing. It became increasingly clear that we were not alone, and the forest was complicit in the creature's hunt. By the second night, exhaustion and terror began to distort our perception. Food and water no longer mattered, only survival did. The creature's presence was constant, a sense of being watched, even when we could not see it. We attempted to leave the area, but kept finding ourselves back in the same clearing, a small, circular patch of ground we came to call the heart of the hollow. The clearing had an almost hypnotic quality, drawing us in, making us feel trapped. Without physical barriers, it was a psychological prison as much as a geographical one, designed by the forest and its predator. During one particularly harrowing moment, the cameras captured the creature moving behind a thin curtain of mist. It paused to observe, almost curious, before disappearing into the darkness. Its intelligence was evident. It was not acting on instinct alone. It calculated, studied, and manipulated the environment to heighten fear, using the forest itself as an extension of its body. Each snap of a branch, each rustle of leaves, was deliberate, orchestrated to keep us disoriented and vulnerable. Sleep became impossible. Every attempt to rest ended with fleeting glimpses of the creature at the periphery of our vision, accompanied by whispers and sounds that did not belong to any animal. The forest seemed alive, almost sentient, aware of our fear and using it as a tool to break our will. Even the cameras, intended as documentation, became instruments of terror. Every playback revealed details we had missed, shapes and movements that defied the laws of physics, eyes that seemed to follow us through every frame. By the third night, desperation overtook reason. We attempted to leave again, marking trees with tape and chalk, but the forest nullified our efforts. Paths looped unnaturally, markers vanished, and distances contracted in impossible ways. We realized that the hollow was not merely was an entity, with the creature acting as its agent, enforcing boundaries and ensuring that no one left unobserved. The realization was horrifying. Escape was an illusion, and every step deeper only increased our vulnerability. Eventually, Mark vanished. One moment he was with us, the next, he had disappeared, leaving only a trail of footprints, abruptly ending in the mud. The creature did not chase him. It observed, patient, allowing him to become part of the forest itself. Panic overtook me and the other friend, Jenna, as we realized we were next. We ran blindly, cameras recording everything, but the forest continued to twist, paths overlapping, branches snaring us in loops we could not escape. When we finally stumbled upon a faint path leading back toward civilization, the creature was gone, yet its presence lingered. The forest returned to a deceptive calm, as if nothing had happened. Our footage, once reviewed, showed moments that made our stomachs churn. Glimpses of Mark's final moments, his expression frozen in terror, eyes reflecting the creature's inhuman intelligence. Shadows shifted unnaturally in multiple frames, and the hum that had haunted us was present even when we were far from the hollow. Even now, weeks later, I feel the forest's influence. Nightmares replay the events with terrifying precision. Shadows at the corners of my vision mimic the creature's movements. Footsteps echo behind me in empty rooms. The cameras we brought back continue to behave strangely, static when the hollow is mentioned, faint whispers on playback, and shapes appearing that were never there when filming. Black Pine Hollow was not just a forest, it was a predator, patient and intelligent, and the creature was its guardian. I warn anyone who hears this account, avoid Black Pine Hollow. The forest does not forgive intrusion. The creature waits, patient and calculated, ensuring that curiosity becomes its prey. Cameras cannot protect you, Friends cannot protect you, and the path out is never guaranteed. The Hollow watches, it records, and it ensures that no one leaves entirely unscathed.